Now, the most common setup that most people do when they actually set up an environment is what we call a hybrid cloud. A hybrid cloud actually gives you the best of both worlds. It gives you the ability to have an on-site network and at the same time also use some of the cloud services. You can use as many or as little cloud services as you want to use. The one nice thing about the cloud is that it is what they call a consumption-based model. And what that means is the more that you use, the more you pay. But the less you use, the less you pay. So you have a lot of flexibility on how you want to use the cloud. If your company has enough money, you can go with the premium. You can get like autopilot. I mean, you really can go to the extreme. A lot of companies actually use the hybrid format for example, Exchange and Office 365. That's probably the most common way to do it. Now, some of the advantages of using the cloud is, again, you got a lot of control. You really can choose what advantages you want to take out of the cloud and only use those advantages. It doesn't have to be an all or nothing. You have a lot of flexibility. One of the nice things that we've talked about in this class is talking about VMs and talking about, like yesterday we talked about storage space. One of the things is that, and this is really one of the true advantages of using Azure. You start running out of hard drive space. You start where you need another server. In a normal environment, if you needed another server, you'd have to buy a server. And then at that point, you would have to set it up, maybe turn it into a virtual server, put operating systems on it, load the actual applications that you want to use. Using the cloud, you literally just go out and build another virtual machine or add another hard drive. Now again, everything that you add in the cloud is going to cost you more money. But you have the flexibility to do it on the fly. Now the cloud can be cost effective. Now this is the one area, and I have it on here because Microsoft talks about it. I can't 100% say basically it's cost effective. And here's the reason why I say that. Most of you probably already have a network that is built and running on your domain. If you already have a network and you have all your apps and everything is actually already running, adding the cloud to the mix could be a great thing for your company. Okay, it can add, where you can have people accessing it from all over the world. You can actually add stuff on the fly. You can get new virtual machines and servers without buying them. But the thing is, if you already have a network that's up and running, and you already have everything that you need, adding Azure is just going to add more cost to your IT department every month. So it really is cost effective if you are trying to add things or do things that you don't already have. Or you just really need a better way to do it because you're running into all kinds of problems. So it really depends on what you're trying to get out of the cloud. Remember something. I said this last week and I say it again. There is no such thing as the cloud. It is a great buzzword, but it truly doesn't exist. The cloud just means that you're putting your resources on somebody else's network. And obviously, you're going to have to pay for that. So the more you use, the more you pay. So it can be cost effective if you don't go crazy. So, normally, listen, when you talk to Microsoft, and some of you may have actually done this when you were looking into going to Azure. Microsoft is almost like a car salesman. All right? You go to buy a brand new car. They may tell you, hey, if you buy this car, you get XM radio. And you get navigation systems. And you get this, and you get that. Now, the thing is, if you just buy a basic car, that car will get you from point A to point B. All the other stuff you're going to pay for is just extra bells and whistles that you get. And Microsoft is always going to try to upsell you to buy more bells and whistles. So when you're deciding to use Azure and you're looking into this, they're going to show you all these cool things that Azure can do, like autopilot. But if you really don't have a need for it, don't spend the money. A basic car will get you to where you want to go. All right? A basic subscription to where you're just going to use Exchange and Office 365 can get you where you might want to go. Yes, would it be great to have all the additional bells and whistles? Absolutely. But you got to put it in context with what your company is going to pay. I mean, think about it. Microsoft is not doing this to lose money. All right? If you've already bought all your stuff, now you're going to end up giving Microsoft a monthly check. And that check can be very expensive. So as a vendor, would you rather get a payment every month for the rest of the life of a company, or have one payment come to you because you bought all the licenses for server and then we don't hear from you again? So, listen, they're not doing this to lose money. Okay? But the point is, don't get sucked into being upsold for stuff that you don't need. If you stay within your lane, it can be very cost effective. One of the easiest things about Azure is it is very easy. It's even easy to actually get all your users actually upgraded to Azure. So, I've shown this, but basically what a hybrid example always looks like is it actually, I've shown you this multiple times. It more or less is you have the ability to go in and have both worlds. You connect the one network to the next, and you're good to go. Now, how I actually said that it's kind of simple to go in and actually set up this link. This link right here is the main thing that we actually set up. This is the little link that gives us what we call single sign-on, so that your users only have to log in once and get access to both. Microsoft gives you all the tools that you need to do this. When you go into Azure and you go into Azure Active Directory, all right, there's an area called Azure Active Directory Connect. And when you go into Azure Active Directory Connect, it's going to give you the tools that you need so that you can actually connect your on-site network with the cloud. So, I'm just, for some reason, my login into Microsoft is a little slow today. I'm out on the portal, but it's like really dragging. So Microsoft must be getting hit with something here, because this is probably the longest it's ever taken. So, I'll just switch you over and show you what I'm looking at. So, I'm actually just trying to get back into the portal, and this is what keeps coming up. So I'm not exactly sure. Let's try it again. Come on. Okay, there we go. All right, so when you go into Azure Active Directory Connect, right on the left-hand side, as you scroll down, there's a little spot right here, Azure Active Directory Connect. This is the utility. So what you do is you actually click on this, you download Azure Active Directory Connect. And then all it does is, the easiest way to do it is to do what they call an express setup. And what it'll do is when you go in, it will ask you basically how do you want to connect the two networks together. Now, the one that's kind of been out there the longest is what we call Federation Services. Federation Services is more or less like a trust. Inside your network, when you add domains, and I add a second domain, there is an actual little link that's automatically set up for you so that the users in these two domains can access resources in each domain. And depending on what rights and permissions you want to give people, when they go across that little link to one of the other domains, they can access what you want to give them. This is what we refer to as a trust. Now, the great thing is, in the Microsoft world, once you build your organization and you build your domains, the trusts are automatic. Well, Microsoft, when they first came out and Azure was first introduced, believe it or not, the very first time I ever connected a domain to Azure, we actually used an old-fashioned trust. But you don't have a lot of flexibility. There's not really a lot you can do. It's more or less, a one-way thing where all of your stuff, all your users, all your accounts basically stayed on Active Directory. You would add your account. The way you would do it is you would do an actual export of your accounts. You do an import into Azure. You assign licenses, and people could connect. But it wasn't a very user-friendly, it wasn't a very easy thing to do. So Microsoft actually came up with a kind of a more advanced way of doing a trust. And it was called Federation Services. Now, Federation Services still to this day works great, and a lot of people still use it. Federation Services is basically really just an advanced trust. But it has a lot more flexibility and a lot more you can do. But then as they continued on, they actually came up with two other ways to actually set up this little single sign-on connection. And really, the biggest thing is, which one do you choose? And why do you choose one over the other? All right, here is the biggest thing. Pass-through authentication. If I set up my cloud environment and I set up my link to use pass-through authentication, what ends up happening is once the actual link is established, the accounts will automatically synchronize with Azure. Same as seamless single sign-on. But the biggest difference between these two is passwords. That's the biggest thing. If you choose pass-through authentication, the passwords that you're going to actually use for both networks are going to stay stored on the domain. So when users actually connect into the cloud and they put in their username and password, the cloud's going to verify that with the domain. Pass-through authentications, the passwords stay on the domain. Seamless single sign-on works differently. It actually sends the passwords up with the accounts. Now, when you actually send your passwords up, there is an actual thing that you can also set up. All right? And you can do it with pass-through authentication, but it's more used when you're using seamless single sign-on. It's actually called write-back, password write-back. And what that means is it gives your users the ability to actually change their passwords in Azure and have those passwords right back to the domain. Now, this is an option that you can use if you want to use it. You don't actually have to use write-back. Now, what are the pros and cons of using write-back on your cloud setup? Well, the pro is obviously they can go into the cloud, they can change their password, and it'll change it inside of the domain. The downside is that they can change a password and it'll change it inside the domain. So why is that an advantage and a disadvantage? Well, here's the reason. Because you got to remember something. And this is something that you always got to keep in the back of your mind. The cloud is out on the internet. It is basically wide open to the internet. So, if you're a hacker, think about it. You want to hack into companies. Do you want to take the time and effort to hack into Azure and possibly have all of the different companies that are inside of that environment? Or do you want to hack into individual companies one at a time? The one problem with cloud-based services is they are very enticing to hackers. I can tell you for a fact, I think it was a year or maybe even a little bit longer now. All right? But there was a big hack on AWS, Amazon Web Services. So it's almost like, yesterday after class we were talking about some pretty big hacks. One of them was Okta. All right? That was a pretty big hack because that is actually used by thousands of companies. Another really big one was SolarWinds. SolarWinds is an actual hacking protection software. The hackers actually hacked SolarWinds. So as SolarWinds sent its software down to all these companies, the hack went with it. So just always keep that in the back of your mind. So again, this is where you got to decide if you want to use write-back or not. It does make it more convenient on your users, but it does kind of open you up a little bit more to where it makes it easier on a hacker to get in and actually change user information. So it really, listen, you can choose any of these. There's no right and there's no wrong. It's just what's best for you. If you know how to use Federation services, then stick with it. The best app you can use is the one you're most comfortable with. So you got to just choose how to do this. But the great thing about it is when you download the Azure Active Directory Connect tool, it's going to walk you through the wizard and it's going to basically just set up whatever you want to set up. Now, the way it does it is during the actual express settings, it's going to ask you for the global administrator account. It's going to ask you for the domain administrator account. And once you put in the proper credentials, the software is going to go through and it's going to make the connection for you. So it's actually a very easy way to connect these two networks together. Now, once your networks are connected together, you have all kinds of different ways that you can actually manage the actual environments. Now, Dwight says there's always a fine line between security, accessibility, usability. Absolutely. Absolutely. The problem is, listen, I know this is going to kind of sound mean, but I don't mean it in a mean way. But to be honest, in my career, I learned one very important thing. I really don't care what users want. I know that's going to sound like really strange because our users are kind of our clients. Everybody has clients. Our end users are our clients. But it's almost like being a parent at times. The network is your child. The users might be your grandchildren. Just because your child or grandchild tells you they want a pony doesn't mean you're going to give them one. Users will always try to make it the easiest way possible on them. But that doesn't always mean it's the right way to go. I've installed multi-factor authentication into companies where people absolutely hated it. Dug their heels in and fought every step of the way. I don't care. Because I know multi-factor authentication is going to protect my network. So I, more or less, as I went through my career, started just doing what was best for the network and not what was best for my users. And that's where you got to walk that fine line. Yes, you want to make it as easy as possible on your end users. But you also got to keep it in a way where you stay secure. And that could be a very difficult thing where they cross up. Okay? So, yes, you're absolutely right. All right? And Joyce makes a good point. Users don't always know what's best for them. No, they don't. All right? They don't. So that's why we get paid what we get paid. That's what we do in our companies. We're there to try to be that last line of defense to make sure that we don't get hacked and we keep our data secure. So when you make your connection and you got to decide, okay, write back could be a great thing. It's going to be a lot easier on your users to change their passwords. It's going to be a lot easier probably even on your IT department. But is that really the best thing for your company? If it is, that's great. But if it's not, don't give it to them just because you're trying to make it easy. Now, when we as IT people manage Azure, one of the biggest ways we're going to do it is through the portal. The portal will allow you to go in and set up all your users, make your connection using Azure Active Directory Connect, can set you up with your groups, can help you build your VMs. Now, there may be times where you need to go a little bit further than the portal. And Azure also has what they call Azure PowerShell. Azure PowerShell is basically a PowerShell environment in Azure so that you can actually run and manage the Azure environment by using PowerShell commands. Now you also have Azure and the command line interface. Now this is the ability where you can go in and actually use almost like a command prompt, a shell, so that you can actually run commands through the command line interface to actually manage and maintain your Azure environment. This can actually be very useful if you're running multiple operating systems that are connected into the Azure environment. If you need to actually manage Linux systems and Linux doesn't give you a really good web browser, so for example, you can use the portal, then you can actually run all your stuff through the command line. And at that point, you can actually set up Azure using the command line interface. Now, you may say to yourself, why would anybody put themselves through this kind of torture? All right. I mean, obviously, going into the Azure portal is one of the easiest things that you can do. You can set your users up. You can download the tools you need. You can easily assign users and groups. Well, the problem that you actually run into is that not every operating system can deal with the Azure portal. And you might be on operating systems like Linux and Unix where you don't want to use a web-based browser. But here's the thing. Anybody out here that is a Unix or Linux guru will tell you everything they do in Linux and Unix is command line driven anyway. So they're really not putting themselves through any more torture because that's what they know. That's what they're comfortable with. So that's the reason why it's there. If you're more or less a GUI person, then most likely you're going to stick with obviously the portal, or you're going to stick with, using PowerShell if you're comfortable with that.